The sullen butler knew and welcomed him. He was subjected to no stage of delay, but ushered direct from the door to the dining room where Dr. Lanyon sat alone over his wine. This was a hearty, healthy, dapper, red-faced gentleman with a shock of hair prematurely white in a boisterous and decided manner. At sight of Mr. Utterson, he sprang up from his chair and welcomed him with both hands. The geniality, as was the way of the man, was somewhat theatrical to the eye, but it reposed on genuine feeling. For these two were old friends, old mates both at school and college, both thoroughly respecters of themselves and of each other, and what does not always follow, men who thoroughly enjoyed each other's company. After a little rambling talk, the lawyer led up to the subject, which so disagreeably preoccupied his mind.
I suppose, Lanyon, you and I must be the two oldest friends that Henry Jekyll has.
I wish the friends were younger. Ha 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 ha. But I suppose we are. And what of that? I see little of you now.
Indeed? I thought you had a bond of common interest.
We had, but it is more than 10 years since Henry Jekyll became too fanciful for me. He began to go wrong in mind, and though of course I continue to take an interest in him for old sake's sake, as they say, I see and I have seen devilish little of the man, such unscientific balderdash,
added the doctor, flushing suddenly purple,
would have a strange dame in Empathias.
This little spirit of temper was somewhat of relief to Mr. Utterson.
They have only differed on some points of science,
he thought, and being a man of no scientific passions, except in the matter of conveyancy, he even added,
it is nothing worse than that.
He gave his friend a few seconds to recover his composure, and then approached the question he had come to put.
Did you ever come across a protege of his, one Hyde?
Hyde? No, never heard of him since my time.
That was the amount of information that the lawyer carried back with him to the great, dark bed on which he tossed and fro, until the small hours of the morning began to grow large. It was a night of little ease to his toiling mind, toiling in mere darkness and besieged by questions. 6 o'clock struck on the bells of the church that was so conveniently near to Mr. Utterson's dwelling, and still he was digging at the problem. Hitherto it had touched him on the intellectual side alone, but now his imagination also was engaged, or rather enslaved. And as he lay and tossed in the gross darkness of the night in the curtained room, Mr. Enfield's tale went by before his mind in a scroll of lighted pictures. He would be aware of the great field of lamps of a nocturnal city. Then of the figure of a man walking swiftly. Then of a child running from the doctors. And then these met. And that human juggernaut trod the child down and passed on regardless of her screams. Or else he would see a room in a rich house, where his friend lay asleep, dreaming and smiling at his dreams. And then the door of that room would be open. The curtains of the bed plucked apart. The sleeper recalled, and lo, there would stand, by his side, a figure to whom power was given. And even at that dead hour, he must rise and do its bidding. The figure in these two phases haunted the lawyer all night. And if, at any time, he dozed over, it was but to see it glide more stealthily through sleepy houses, or move the more swiftly and still the more swiftly, even to dizziness, through wider labyrinths of lamp-lighted city, and at every street corner crush a child and leave her screaming. And still, the figure had no face by which he might know it. Even in his dreams, it had no face, or one that baffled him and melted before his eyes. And thus it was that there, sprung up and grew apace in the lawyer's mind, a singularly strong, almost inordinate, curiosity to behold the features of the real Mr. Hyde. If he could but once set eyes on him, he thought the mystery would lighten, and perhaps roll altogether away, as was the habit of mysterious things, when well examined. He might see a reason for his friend's strange preference, or bondage, call it what you please, and even for the startling clause of the will. At least it would be a face worth seeing, face of a man who was without bowels of mercy. A face which had but to show itself to raise up, in the mind of the impressionable Enfield, a spirit of enduring hatred. From that time forward, Mr. Utterson began to haunt the door in the by-street of shops. In the morning before office hours, at noon when business was plenty and the time scarce, at night under the face of the fogged city moon, by all lights and at all hours of solitude or concourse, the lawyer was to be found on his chosen post.
If he be Mr. Hyde, I shall be Mr. Seek.
And at last, his patience was rewarded. It was a fine, dry night, frost in the air, the streets as clean as ballroom floor, the lamps unshaken by any wind, drawing a regular pattern of light and shadow. By 10 o'clock, when the shops were closed, the by-street was very solitary, and in spite of the low growl of London from all around, very silent. Small sounds carried far. Domestic sounds out of the houses were clearly audible on either side of the roadway, and the rumor of the approach of any passenger preceded him by a long time. Mr. Utterson had been some minutes at his post when he was aware of an odd, light footstep drawing near. In the course of his nightly patrols, he had long grown accustomed to the quaint effect with which the footfalls of a single person, while he is still a great way off, suddenly spring out distinct from the vast hum and clatter of the city. Yet, his attention had never before been so sharply and decisively arrested, and it was with a strong, superstitious prevision of success that he withdrew into the entry of the court. The steps drew swiftly nearer, and swelled out suddenly louder as they turned the end of the street. The lawyer, looking forth from the entry, could soon see what manner of man he had to deal with. He was small and very plainly dressed, and the look of him, even at that distance, went somehow strongly against the watcher's inclination. But he made straight for the door, crossing the roadway to save time. And as he came, he drew a key from his pocket like one approaching home. Mr. Utterson stepped out and touched him on the shoulder as he passed.
Mr. Hyde, I think.
Mr. Hyde shrank back with a hissing intake of the breath. But his fear was only momentary, and though he did not look the lawyer in the face, he answered coolly enough.
That is my name. What do you want?
I see you were going in. I am an old friend of Dr. Jekyll's, Mr. Utterson of Gaunt Street. You must have heard my name, and meeting you so conveniently, I thought you might admit me.
You will not find Dr. Jekyll. He is from home,
replied Mr. Hyde, blowing the key, and then, suddenly, but still without looking up,
how did you know me?
On your side, would you do me a favor?
With pleasure. What shall it be?
Will you let me see your face?
Mr. Hyde appeared to hesitate, and then, as if upon some sudden reflection, fronted about with an air of defiance, and the pair stared at each other pretty fixedly for a few seconds.
Now I shall know you again. It may be useful.
Yes, it is as well we have met. And I propose you should have my address.
And he gave a number of a street in Soho.
Good God! Can he too have been thinking of the will?
But he kept his feelings to himself, and only grunted in acknowledgement of the address.
And now, how did you know me?
By description.
Whose description?
We have common friends.
Common friends? Who are they?
Jekyll, for instance.
He never told you. I did not think you would lie.
Come, that is not fitting language.
The other snarled aloud into a savage laugh. And the next moment, with extraordinary quickness, he had unlocked the door and disappeared into the house. The lawyer stood a while when Mr. Hyde had left him, the picture of disquietude. Then he began slowly to mount the street, pausing every step or two, putting his hand to his brow, like a man in mental perplexity. The problem he was thus debating as he walked was one of a class that is rarely solved. Mr. Hyde was pale and dwarfish. He gave an impression of deformity, without any nameable malformation. He had a displeasing smile. He had borne himself to the lawyer with a sort of murderous mixture of timidity and boldness, and he spoke with a husky, whispering, and somewhat broken voice. But not all these together could explain the hitherto unknown disgust, loathing, and fear with which Mr. Utterson regarded him.
There must be something else. There is something more. If I could find a name for it. God bless me. That man seems hardly human. Something troglodytic. Or can it be the old story of Dr. Fell? Or is it the mere radiance of a foul soul that thus transpires through and transfigures its clay continent? The last, I think, for oh my poor old hairy Jekyll. If ever I read Satan's signature upon a face, it is on that of your new friend.